Good afternoon, LinkedIn and YouTube family. We're so glad you're here. We have an awesome conversation planned for you today with Ali Davies. I'm going to bring Ali in. I know this is going to be a really enlightening conversation. So let me bring her in. Ali, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
No, this is awesome. So here's the story for those of you watching in. And by the way, if you're watching us live, by all means, go ahead and ask your questions. I will read your comments to Ali, and she can go ahead and answer any of your questions you may have. If you're watching this in replay, still go ahead and ask your questions in the thread because either Ali or I will get back to you. But we want this to be for you. But I want to give you a little backstory as to how our conversation came about. So Ali and I have a very good mutual friend, Dory Clark, whose recent book called The Long Game, which is fantastic, by the way. I have, as you can see by the office, I'm in the Self-Employed Business Institute. We're going to make Dory's book, The Long Game, required reading for our students, because I think it's so important when you're in business to think long game, long term. And I also think the world, particularly the business world, desperately needs more longer term thinking because it's been too short term, too hustle culture for too long. And for somebody like me who's been in business for 37 years, that only happens by thinking long game. So loved her book. But in Dory's book, Dory interviews Ali, and Ali makes a comment about how we believe the stories we tell ourselves. And as a change strategist, I thought, nobody's going to understand this more than Ali. So I wanted to have this conversation about how we believe the stories we tell ourselves and how they stop us from living our biggest and boldest lives, particularly if you're thinking about leaving your corporate job to become self-employed. Is it a story, I wonder, that's stopping you from doing that? So Ali, how do we even unpack? That's such a big idea. And I'm wondering, I'm sure part of this comes from your own personal experience, but how have you seen evidence in your own life or with those that you serve, how the stories we tell ourselves stop us from stepping into our biggest?
Well, I think I've experienced a lot in my own personal life, particularly when I was leaving the corporate world, but also, as you say, in the people I've been serving over the last 20 years. And what I see is there's two elements to creating change successfully. There's what I call the logistical side, which is things like the plans and the goals and what you need to do and your tasks and all of that sort of stuff. And people are normally okay with that sort of stuff. They understand, well, I need to save some money if I'm leaving the corporate world, or I need to rescale, or whatever it is. But then there's another element, which is what I call the human side of change. And that's the side we all overlook. Because we're not taught how to do it. And what I mean by that is it's that we have habits, emotions, and behaviors, those sorts of things that actually drive how we implement those things and how we step forward. And one of the things I learned when I was leaving the corporate world was I sat down and I mapped out what I wanted, where I wanted to go. And I used to do some consultancy and project management. So, I felt very skilled at doing that. But as the time got closer to leaving the corporate world, I found myself finding excuses not to. Anyway, to cut a long story short, as I dived into that, I realized it was things I was telling myself that was holding me back. And I've seen the same with people I've worked with over the years, which led me to believe that we need to give equal amount of time to what I call the human side of change, who we are, our beliefs, our behaviors, our emotions, as we do to the logistical side. But most of us don't do that or even know we have to do that.
Are there, and I never looked at it this way before until listening to you in this moment, are there layers to stories? One of the first stories that came up for me when I read your comment in Dory's book was the story that so many people tell themselves about why they don't leave their job, that their job gives them security.
Yeah.
And as a self-employed person my whole life, I look at it saying, really? Because I don't think there's any security in, a traditional job. Or as I often said, when you're self-employed, if you're going down, it's a slow, painful death. right? But I would live in fear of like somebody just pulling the rug out from underneath us. So are there layers? So to me, that's sort of a little bit of a surface level story in that we're telling ourselves, oh no, I can't leave the job because it offers me security. But then there are the deeper stories that we tell ourselves that probably tap into our deeper fears and resistance. Are there layers to stories?
I think definitely. And to use that first example of this is my career, I've been doing it a long time, it's secure. And I had that exact same story, as do many people leaving the corporate world. You and I know it's not true. And at an intellectual level, when you're thinking that it's not true, because you can be made redundant at any time, the company can be taken over at any time, you could be passed over for promotion. And so there is no real security, but we tell ourselves that because the layer underneath it, I believe, is fear, and linked to self-identity as well. Because let me backstep a second. Some people do perceive that to be secure, because that's what we're programmed to believe. Get a steady job, leave school, get a steady job, and sort of it's a conditioning thing. But underneath that, when you start to know you want to leave or want to do something different, but you're using that story to yourself, underneath it usually is something like fear. Fear because we're perceived successful and our self-identity is wrapped up in it. Fear that the security is actually associated to finances. So if I leave this secure income, so it's the income that feels secure, not necessarily the career. And if I leave that, oh my God, how will I survive? How will I pay the bills? And that sort of thing. So I think there's lots of levels underneath each story, and most of them can be, not most of them, they can be split into some predominant categories, one being self-identity and one being our thoughts and beliefs and emotions.
Yeah. So with the self-identity piece, what I have experienced with many clients that I have coached making the transition from corporate life to self-employed life is, which again has always fascinated me as someone so far out of the corporate world, having always been self-employed, is that people struggle with the letting go of a title.
Oh, yeah.
So is there a story of value and worth that they have accumulated because of the title they held in their corporate job?
I think there's that. There's the how we identify ourselves is with things, but there's also how we're preconditioned to define success. So we're conditioned that success is, oh, look, I've got a fancy title and a fancy office and a fancy corporation, therefore I'm successful, I earn a lot of money. So there's the preconditioning of success is one of the key drivers with that. And then underneath is the sort of fear, the fear of, this is who I am as a person.
Yeah,
I've got to this. So there's almost multiple layers, and it can be different from different people, but you've got things like self-doubt. A lot of people have imposter syndrome. Those sorts of things are the stories that are the factors underneath the layers of the stories, if that makes sense.
One of the things that fascinates me about imposter syndrome, and I've been encouraging a good friend of mine who wrote an amazing book called Banisher and a Critic, Denise Jacobs. It's truly my favorite book on the topic of inner critic, the stories we tell ourselves inside that nobody else hears. And I've been fascinated by the idea that imposter syndrome can often increase as you become more successful. We think it's one of those voices we're going to leave behind, but in fact, if suddenly you realize that you're getting the attention that you have been striving for all along, that it actually can increase the feeling of imposter syndrome because the spotlight is on you. But again, that's all based in story, right? I mean, there's some story that we're telling ourselves. Share with us a little bit about your own literal story, again, layers, your own literal story of you leaving your job. And if you can, share with us kind of the intimacy of what was going on for you. What were some of the stories, fears? How did you become brave enough to break through those stories and make the move to self-employment?
Well, it was a long process, to be honest. I sat in a lot of discomfort and pain for a long time before I actually did anything about it. And what happened was I'd started my corporate career when I was 21, and I was with some major global drinks organizations, and I was progressing in supply chain management and customer services and moving and being promoted. And but I didn't come from that sort of background. And so I perceived this as successful. I was successful because I had this job and this career, and I was working for some of the biggest brands in the world. And then after, I'd say, the first few years of being in that, I started to notice feelings of discomfort. I'm feeling unhappy. I'm feeling unfulfilled. And I just kept ignoring them and pushing them down, thinking, well, I'm successful, just get on with it, suck it up. But the voices got louder and louder, and I still suppressed them because of that story. Well, I'm successful, so why am I so miserable? And then it got to a stage where I just couldn't ignore it anymore, and I did start to challenge it and think, why do I feel like this? Isn't this what people tell us we should strive for success? Anyway, to cut a long story short, I got in touch with a lady, and she mentioned to me about understanding what you value. What's most important to you? What do you really value in life? And that really started me thinking about, well, I value things like freedom and putting family first, doing things that add values to people's life. And once I started to dig into putting the definition of success aside and what was most important to me, actually, it was quite obvious there was no match. I was working in work that was all about the bottom figures. No matter how many organizations say it's about the people, it's about the bottom figures.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do things because I was managing teams as well at the time. And I wasn't able to manage them in the way I wanted to, because sometimes I wanted to put them first and not the company. And so I got to a stage where I thought, well, if this is success, it can't be right to feel like this. So I'm going to redefine success for myself. If for me to feel fulfilled and for my work to feel meaningful, what would that be? And I literally just started to write it out. And it turned into what I would now call a vision of sort of, this is what ideal would be for me. And if this is ideal, therefore, this is my definition of success. And then when you hold that up against the success you're striving for or living for or wearing as a badge of honor and see there's no match, then you're forced to make a choice.
Yeah.
I either stay in this knowing it's not right for me, know I'm sacrificing what's most important to me, or I look for how to make the change. And that's how it came up for me. And that question just would not go away. Whose definition of success are you living by?
Wow. You're reminding me, your story reminds me a little bit of Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project. Mm-hmm. And I've interviewed her on my podcast, read her book, and she tells the story similarly. Like, she had everything in life. She had the good job. She had the happy marriage. She had the healthy kids. She was literally on a New York City bus looking out the window at children playing in the streets and a beautiful day in New York City and realizing, I have everything, but there's something missing. I'm not sure what it is. Like, she recognized her happiness was missing. So in a way, she was telling herself the story that she had everything, which in itself is a story.
Yes.
And suppressing, what her gut was, really telling her. So she went about the happiness project as she went about seeking her happiness, which thankfully didn't mean dramatic changes. It's not like, it wasn't eat, pray, love. It's not like she walked away from her family. It wasn't that. It was just a conscious practice of finding her happiness. But I'll share this with you from my own personal perspective. I was actually thinking about this morning as I walked my dog, because since I wrote my book, The Self-Employed Life, I've become kind of fascinated by the word self, as silly as that might sound, because there's so many ways we talk about self-worth, self-value. There's a lot of ways we talk about self, or as I often say, my route to success for those that I coach is that, hey, I can give you business strategies until the end of the day. That's easy for me. The work that most of us have to do is personal development work, which is a big part of my book, because truly, when you're self-employed, your level of success is relative to your level of personal development, right? You have to grow as a person before you can reach higher levels of success. So the word self-help has really kind of fascinated me. And I was thinking this morning about selfish, right? Which, of course, as a story has kind of a negative connotation, but I like the ish part. It's kind of like, guess what? I'm a little selfish. The fact of the matter is, the reason I've been self-employed my whole life is I am a little selfish, meaning everything, the way I've lived my entire life has been based on every decision I've made in business has been based on how I want to live first. Mm-hmm. So I've not battled what I see in other people with traditional jobs, that battle of, I'm living this story of success. Because to me, there is no story of success unless it's the story you want to live. But so many people are living a story of success, while at the same time, their brain is telling them a story that of something else they want, and a story that's a fear story that's keeping them from that.
And I think what they overlook as well when they're in the midst of all of that is, you know, by hanging on to what that is, and they think they're doing the right thing, and but it's not just affecting them; it's affecting the people around them, like, you know, that their marriage, or how they show up as a parent, or, you know, they're so isolated they neglect their friends and all of this sort of stuff. So people see it as well. You know, it's one fact, and I think that's another problem when it comes to the stories is we see things in little silos, little isolation, without saying, well, how is that impacting the whole of my life? And then to your point about being selfish, is because since we're little kids, we're told, oh, don't be selfish, don't be selfish. We've got that deeply ingrained in us. But actually, to be selfish, as you're saying, to put ourselves first, whether it's in our career, our health, time for ourselves, or whatever, it allows us to show up as who we truly are, which can only benefit our marriage, our choices, our decisions, our parenting, our friendships, and everything. So it's not as isolated, it's not as an isolated thing as people think it is. It absolutely permeates everything. So being selfish is actually service to the other people in your life as well.
100%. I love that. I love this. Like, yeah, I love that you're saying it the same way. It's like selfish, right? It's not entirely selfish or self-centered. It's just, yeah, I live my life a little selfish, right? I don't ignore that I'm in the picture, because to your point, it really, you know, on a personal level, and I'll share this because of the value of our conversation, that, and I've seen so many people go through this process, that when I was at the brink of deciding whether to divorce, and this is nearly 20 years ago, but I had 3 kids, my youngest being 5, my oldest is 10. So they were like, you know, 5, 8, and 10, young kids. And I had a friend, and I didn't think of it as a story I was telling myself until this moment, but I had a friend ask me, so he said to me, to what degree do you believe you're responsible for the outcome of your kids' lives? And I said, 100%. And he goes, then you'll never divorce. And really what it was a story I was telling myself, that if you know, the outcome of my kid's life was contingent on their parents staying together, because that's what I had been told. That's what I had believed. My parents, in fact, had stayed together until my father's passing. So, but being asked the question made me step back and say, that's just a story. That's absolutely not true, because I don't know what my kids are going to take from the divorce. They could, as quite honestly, I think my kids have this story they had to take from it. They've been a lot more careful about the relationships they've gotten into, right? They're a lot more conscious of their partnership choices. And actually, I've always said my kids have always had healthier relationships than I have. Like, you know, until now, I finally got my act together, but their learning curve was much shorter, right? So
but that's the thing as well, isn't it? What we're role modeling, just not for our kids, is in the choices we make for ourselves, we role model. Like in the example you've just used, am I role modeling I stay in a relationship even though it's not working? Is that what I want to role model?
100%.
For myself, and you know, even in work situations with staff, and to your point about that being a story about what you were telling yourself there, I saw in an interview, must have been a good couple of years ago now, Brené Brown, the author of Rising Strong and all those books, she said one of the questions to ask yourself to sort of break that cycle, because it's very difficult to break that cycle yourself, because you don't always realize you're doing it. But she said something along the lines of, every time you are thinking something, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself here? And it's not that you'll change the story, but it's just a sanity check that the story I'm telling myself is X, Y, and Z. And it just starts that, hopefully, that journey into a bit of self-awareness that, is that true? I mean, are my kids going to be better off if we stay together? You know, might they actually be a bit better if their father or their mother is happier? You know, and there's not the tension in the house, or whatever it is they're experiencing. So I think that's a really helpful thing to do, is to look where we can break that cycle, whether through that question of, you know, or what story am I telling myself, or, you know, how do I define success? And I think you've hit the nail on the head when you said about the questions. It's the questions we ask ourselves that are almost like circuit breakers, because if we don't start asking questions, we just keep going around the loop of our own stories. Well, I can't because I haven't got enough money, or people would think, oh, it's not going to work. We just keep going. So one of the things I always suggest to people is check if you're thinking in statements or questions. Because if you're thinking in statements, you're just going to keep going around that loop indefinitely. Yeah. At some stage, you've got to ask a question. And if you can't come up with the questions yourself, then that's when to hire someone like yourself, or ask a friend or someone you trust is going to give you an honest answer.
Yeah, and I think, gosh, you just hit the nail on the head. The value of asking yourself questions, and I also believe, and I've come to believe through my own years of maturity, as well as coaching for so many years, decades now, that as we mature, it is fascinating to me how quickly, as the classic phrase goes, life can turn on a dime. Like when we're younger, it may take a little more nurturing and therapy, but when we hit of a certain age, it is amazing the power a single question can offer, an opportunity for you to completely change your mindset and make a different decision. And I don't think that could be more true than when it comes to stories, because just simply asking ourselves, where is this story coming from? Is this story true? And do I want to continue to believe this story?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a key point there, is educating ourselves or becoming aware that everything's a story.
Yeah.
Everything's a story, either from conditioning or experiences or beliefs or emotions or anything. And when we accept that, it's like you said, we can do that sanity check with ourselves. And it might not mean we change everything, but it will stop us staying stuck. And to your point there about life changing in a dime, I always say to people, do this proactively, because you just do not ever know. When people say, oh, well, I might wait until the kids leave home, or I might wait another couple of years. And particularly with younger people, I always say, what makes you think you've got those years?
Yeah.
From a personal experience, I was doing that. I'd left my corporate career, and the next thing was to move places to live. And I had a vision of what I wanted the next chapter of life. And I'd gone back into tootling along and just going at a, almost complacent pace of the future I had in front of me. And then one day I was hosting a meeting. I was working with some businesswomen when I still lived in the Republic of Ireland. And I was hosting a meeting and I was facilitating it. And I don't usually have my phone on because I don't like phones going off in meetings. But my watch was broken, so I was using my phone as a timer. And we were just coming towards questions and answers, and the phone went, and it was my husband. And straight away I felt quite irritated, because I thought, he knows I'm in an important meeting. He knows I'm facilitating this today. Why on earth would he phone? What I didn't think was my husband would not phone me knowing I'm in this meeting.
Right.
Anyway, to cut a long story short, at the break, I went and phoned back, and it wasn't my husband, it was a paramedic telling me my husband had been in a serious car crash.
Oh.
And I needed to get myself to the hospital.
Wow.
And he nearly died in that crash. He's fine. He survived. Spoiler.
Okay, good. Happy and good. Has a good ending.
He's fine. Wow. But I didn't know that. And I sat in that hotel, in that hospital waiting room for an hour, where they put you in the room where you think, oh my God, this is the room where they tell you that they're dead. And I sat there for an hour thinking, am I going to have to go home tonight and tell a 6-year-old boy that his daddy's not coming home? And even now it chokes me up a little, because it's like you say, thankfully it turned out well for us. Yeah. But if it didn't, there was a lot of plans.
Well, like you said, there's no guarantee of tomorrow. And I think, again, because of those that are likely to be watching our conversation, as well as those who I coach. I mean, I always say I coach people of a certain age. That's my preference. Midlife is a broad range. It's probably anywhere from 35 to 75 these days. It's a broad. I love Chip Conley's. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he wrote a book, The Modern Elder, and
I love that work.
Yeah, The Making of a Modern Elder, and I love the point he made, that the fact that we're living longer doesn't mean that we're older longer. It actually means that we're midlife longer. So there is this broad span of years in which we are considered of a certain age or midlife. And I think, something we need to ask ourselves is that, I would be, as a child, my father passed when I was young, but I would be horribly disappointed to find out that my parents didn't live the life of their dreams. And particularly if I, as their child, in any way played a role in that. And I think this is something with no guarantee of tomorrow. I think this is something that anyone who is really questioning their happiness, the story they're telling themselves that they owe it to their family to stay in a corporate job because it's giving them a paycheck and predictability and health insurance, all of which are responsible, important things. And I don't discredit anybody for taking the honorable road in life.
Mm.
But you have to wonder, how disappointed might your kids be if they find out at some point when you're not around that you didn't live your life fully, and if they had any part in that.
Yeah, you're right. It's about what they think, but also it's back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, is what are we role modeling if we do that? You know, would we want our kids to do the same? Would we want them to sacrifice their happiness, their having fulfillment in their life? And if we don't, we shouldn't role model that for them.
Yeah. I'm curious, I feel like there's information in by you sharing with us exactly what you do as a change strategist. Like, I love the idea of that. And so if you could describe to us a little bit about what it is that a change strategist does, and what that, I think, will help us understand what the challenges are that many of us face.
Well, I think as a change strategist, I do two things. And it's really, I like to keep things very simple because I think complexity kills everything.
Yeah.
So what I do is I say to people, when people think of change, we think of, here I am, here's where I want to be, or here's where I am, and I don't quite know where I want to be. And there's figuring out that path. It's the roadmap. It's what you need to have in place. It's the tasks you need to do and the things you need to carry out. And then there's the human side. These are the things, who do I need to be? So I like to simplify it by saying you just need two things in place. That's it. What do I need to do? And who do I need to be? You integrate those two things, and that will move you to where you need to go. So as a change strategist, or helping someone navigate change, it really is about making sure that they're covering both those bases. And in its simplest form, that's what it is.
Beautiful. Wow. And what is most likely to prevent that? Like, what tends to be the biggest obstacle that people have a hard time integrating those two things?
I think one of the things is, I mean, you mentioned about your work with personal development, and I think one of the most important things is that the willingness to look at yourself. I think that's absolutely key, because I came into all of this. I didn't mention, but when I was in the corporate world, change management was a big part of my corporate career. And when I got to that stage and was still struggling to make changes in my own life, it was all about sort of, well, my God, why can't I make this happen? I've done change management for 14 years. And it's understanding that you can't apply the change unless you're in the right mindset and have the right habits and behaviors. So the starting point of being open to self-awareness, of being open to say, how might I need to change? Not just the things around me need to change. How might I need to change as a person? And so I think self-awareness is the starting point and is key to everything that comes after.
I don't know why this is reminding me of the Adele concert that was just on the other night that millions watched, and interviewed by Oprah throughout the concert. Did you have a chance to see it?
I didn't know. I've seen some little flip.
Yeah. So there was, Oprah was interviewing, and who doesn't respect Oprah? I mean, I highly respect her, although I don't think it was a very strong interview, because as an interviewer myself, through my podcast and my conversations here, I was just biting at the bullet to ask Adele a question that Oprah wasn't getting to, because there was so much conversation around her divorce, which has clearly, gotten a lot of attention. What I wanted Oprah to ask has everything to do with what you're talking about, a change, which is, I wanted to hear from Adele the truth of change, is that it wasn't so much, honestly, and having been through so many changes in my own life, it wasn't so much the divorce that set forward a cascade of personal circumstances. It was the fact that change was like a mirror that she now had to look at herself in a way that she hadn't looked at before. And it was killing me that Oprah wasn't asking for more information about that, because that, I think, would have been the most helpful part of the conversation, as it is a helpful part of change, is that the changes in our lives, it's often not the change, the career change, the job change, the relationship change. It's the change becomes a mirror in which we have to look at ourselves in a way that we've not looked at ourselves before, to understand how did we get there and how do we break the pattern.
Absolutely.
That's the work. That's
Yeah.
the tough work of change.
And you know what? I think a lot of people recoil from that. And a lot of people recoil from it is because nobody tells them the truth of doing that word. It's hard.
Yep.
It's very, very uncomfortable.
Yep.
And it brings up a lot of uncertainty. And in some cases, it brings up a lot of pain. And as human beings, we're designed to recoil from that. But like you say, if you hold up the mirror, you've got to be willing to step into all that discomfort and all those challenges. And it feels hard and it feels uncomfortable. And that's what I always say about change. People say, oh, change is so hard. Change isn't hard at all. It's a series of steps. It's being willing to step into the discomfort of having to take a long, hard look at yourself.
Yeah.
And who you need to be to make that change happen.
But you know what? I think probably with regards to most change, I've asked every single self-employed person I have ever asked, every person I've ever asked that has left a traditional job for self-employment, would you have it any other way? Despite the change, despite the challenges, despite the mirror in front of you and the personal growth and challenges you have to go through, not one person has ever said they regret it.
I've had the same, but you know what I hear most? Not only do they not regret it, I've heard a lot of people, including myself, say it falls into the category of things I wish I'd done years ago.
Years ago, always. Yeah. That's actually been the number one feedback on my book. People are like, why didn't I get this book? Where were you 20 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the importance of the work you're doing, Jeffrey, is that, I mean, when I started on this path, and I know many of the people, there was no roadmap. I mean, the process I mapped out for myself, I just went through the pain and the trial and the error and the mistakes. And I think that's why work like yours is so valuable, because it makes it a lot easier. It takes away a lot of the mistakes and people can learn from your experiences. And that's one of the things I always say to people is don't do it alone.
No, it's self-employment inherently. I mean, I recently had a social media post about the usage of the term solopreneur. You know, I get it. I just keep asking people to please don't call themselves a solopreneur, because you're never going to get to where you want to go if you're thinking solo. Because if you're thinking you're on the road alone, you're not going to get as big as to where you want to go. And please don't think you're alone. And I said in the post, you can use the term, but just know that I'm here to convince you that you're not in this alone, that there are millions and millions of self-employed people. It's why I started the Self-Employed Business Institute, because I realized after decades of coaching, everybody I coached was super talented at what they did, but almost always in an industry that there's no business education on how to make money at that skill, right? I mean, I've gone through so many, you know, I'm a photographer and a speaker and a coach, and, you know, I've received training on so much of what I'm good at, but nobody ever taught me how to make money at it. I had to figure it out on my own. And I see no reason why we should keep reinventing the wheel. Self-employed businesses are unique. The experience, the self-employed life is unique. And we just need to come together to share in that experience. So speaking of which, I want to share this document, the Self-Employed Ready, which Ali was a huge part in helping me prepare. So the self-employed, if you are considering at some point, any point of leaving your traditional job, one of the questions I got asked all the time is, what do I do when? You know, I think I'm going to leave in 1 year, 6 months, 3 years from now. What do I do when? So I sat down, interviewed a bunch of people, got great feedback from Ali and others on what are the 12-month timeline. If you've given yourself a year's notice that you're going to leave your corporate job in a year to set out in self-employment, we created this document that will help you plan out the year before you leave. Hey, if you plan on leaving in 6 months or it's pending, you just need to speed up steps a little bit. It's still doable, but you can go ahead and grab your free copy of that, selfemployedready.com. Again, Ali, you were hugely helpful in the creation of that. So thank you for that. And that's how I first feel like I got to know you. Yeah, good. Excellent. Well, again, this has been so informative. I love the conversation around change. And I love the fact that, you know, we had a conversation about life and divorce and all the parts of change that have everything to do with the self-employed life. Because one of the things that makes being self-employed unique is that we don't live life in departments, you know, it's all kind of blended together. So thank you so much for being here and for the work that you do. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is a topic very close to my heart, and I've really enjoyed chatting to you about it.
Well, you certainly got in touch with it as well. So thank you. Awesome. Well, we're so grateful for Ali. We hope you'll join us. We try to be here almost every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So at any point, join us again. And again, if you have questions, by all means, you can come back, to the thread and ask your questions. We'd love to get back to you. But until then, be well. Hope to see you soon.